Thank you. Thank you very much. That was very kind and generous of you. And I'm honored to be here, especially reuniting with Creative Time in that very special moment that we created in New Orleans, which is still resonating today when we did Waiting for Godot. People in New Orleans are still waiting for that euphemistically superior person who's supposed to come and clean things up, that imaginary Godot who never comes. But we know that we have it within ourselves to do it ourselves, and that's the spirit that you see in the work that's being done in New Orleans. So Creative Time, thank you for having me here today. It's an honor. And thank you, Ann. It's good to see you again. It's an honor to stand here on this hallowed stage where so many important Americans engaged in the important public discourse of their time. You can't help but feel the very presence of Lincoln as he began his journey to American icon. But I will try to be brief so we can get to Mr. Lowe. But you know, they elected a brother as president, and whenever you give us an open mic, you never can tell. But good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here among you. It's a pleasure to be able to come here before you and tell you about some of the work that we're doing in New Orleans. And it's a particular pleasure to introduce to you the winner of the 2010 Lenore Annenberg Prize for Art and Social Change. I was struck by the title of your conference, Revolutions in Practice. Not revolution, but revolutions. Now, I'm sure the organizers were referring to the number of artists who are represented here and to the varied nature of their work. But I thought about the revolution that we all experienced 2 years ago, this month, in fact, and the fact that we apparently need recurring revolutions to bring about tangible change for the people who most need it in this country. Revolutions in practice. If I sound a little upset, it's only because I am. In the more colloquial vernacular, I'm actually a little pissed off. We live in a dynamic, exciting, historic time, yet many seem not to recognize it or are determined to take us back to a more negative time and place. We live in an age of abundance. Yet more people than ever are struggling to make ends meet, to keep a roof over their head, and to send their children to decent schools. I feel like the narrator in Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, who famously observed that it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. We elected a black man president in one of the proudest moments of my life, and 2 years later, pundits talk about an enthusiasm gap because so many of his supporters are disappointed in him. Disappointed? After 8 years of George Bush, some of us are disappointed. Now, don't get me wrong, I get mad at our presidents for a number of reasons when his administration bends over backwards to appease independent white voters who are constantly looking for a reason not to support him and will no doubt find one no matter what he does. When he doesn't make the arts and artists a priority despite their critical role in our society, and despite their importance in bad economic times. But wanting different decisions on specific issues is very different from being disappointed to the degree that I wouldn't support his agenda and the party that's trying to execute that agenda. I'm frustrated because I want him to succeed, and we all need him to succeed. But he doesn't get the recognition he deserves for he doesn't get the recognition he deserves for historic victories in reforming health care, revolutions in practice, saving our financial system, no matter what you think of that. It's a revolution in practice. Or getting the troops out of Iraq, a revolution in practice. Any of these would have been sufficient, would have had people singing the praises of Bush or even Clinton, but we have an enthusiasm gap with this president. I feel torn because I understand what he must feel sometimes. You see, W.E.B. Du Bois wrote about that dual existence that African Americans experience, saying, "It is a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder." Now, this dual lens on oneself and the world plays out in many ways. For instance, I was so thankful and heartened by the outpouring of support to my hometown of New Orleans post-Katrina and the response I've personally received to my efforts there. Yet I am frustrated beyond belief at the barriers that have been placed in our way by some of the same people who don't want to see Obama succeed. Some of you may know that I'm leading a grassroots effort to rebuild a historic neighborhood in New Orleans, my beloved Pontchartrain Park, the only neighborhood where blacks could purchase a home in post-World War II segregated New Orleans. This is an important middle-class black neighborhood that has produced the likes of Lisa Jackson, the head of the EPA, Terrence Blanchard, the Grammy Award-winning acclaimed jazz trumpeter and film composer, Mark Morial, the former mayor and the president of the National Urban League today, and many, many others such as myself. These residents have engaged in the purest form of democracy by exercising the right of self-determination and rebuilding their community on their own. Now, I won't go on into the details of their struggle, but I will tell you that after 2 years of raising money, fighting off speculators, negotiating city, state, and federal bureaucracies, rebuffing naysayers, rallying citizens, resisting despair, and being recognized and honored across the country for all of this work, we now have 111 pre-qualified home buyers ready to move home. And yet, the subsidies promised are inaccessible because they are still being unnecessarily renegotiated and have delayed the closings for these hundreds of folks. This is in a context where there is still $3 billion earmarked dollars to rebuild and repopulate New Orleans sitting unspent. $3 billion over 5 years, sitting unspent. I'm proud of the work, but I'm angry and frustrated because while many celebrate the positive changes that have occurred in the 5 years after Katrina, the only public work at scale, the only public work of scale that has been completed in New Orleans is the demolition of almost all public housing structures, continuing to displace the working poor who desperately want to move home as well. Now, this would disgust even Mr. Peter Cooper, the very man who built this university so that the poor of New York would have access to an education of architecture, engineering, and fine arts. But I don't give up and I don't give in, partly because I'm encouraged and inspired by the work of people like this man here, this year's Annenberg Prize winner, Mr. Rick Lowe. I believe that one of the roles of art is to awaken and enlighten us, to fire our imaginations, and to inspire our work. In New Orleans, we have gone further and developed tangible, sustainable solutions. And in our sister city of Houston, home to thousands of displaced New Orleanians, Rick Lowe has done the same thing. In 1993, moved by the imminent demolition of several blocks of shotgun-style houses in Houston's North 3rd Ward, one of the city's oldest African-American communities, Rick Lowe came up with a plan to preserve the neighborhood's historic homes and provide essential services for its residents. Called Project Row Houses, it has become one of the most important neighborhood-based community-engaged art projects in the world. Project Row Houses has been the catalyst for the creation of homes for single mothers and their children, residency spaces for artists like us, to create new work with the local community, community gardens, health centers, and much more. Originally occupying a group of 22 houses covering 1.5 city blocks, Project Row Houses has grown to include over 40 renovated properties containing exhibition spaces, a literary center, a multimedia, performance, art space, offices, low-income housing, and other amenities. Project Row Houses emerged out of discussions with African-American artists who wanted to establish a positive creative presence in their own community. To this day, it carries on this vision, proving that art and the community it creates can be the foundation for revitalizing depressed inner-city neighborhoods. Rick was inspired by the principles of renowned artist John Biggers, the late African-American muralist, who painted black neighborhoods of shotgun houses like the ones on Holman Street and showed them to be places of pride and community, not poverty and crime, pride and community. Biggers spoke of art as a way to create an effective community, and Rick has done just that. The project seeks to integrate art into the fabric of everyday life and is at once a space for producing and celebrating culture, a model for community revitalization, a forum for education, and a way to preserve the architecture and history of a neighborhood. His groundbreaking vision and long-term commitment to this community has been influential worldwide. He was a Loeb Fellow at the Harvard School of Design, and in 2002 won the Heinz Award in the Arts and Humanities. In 2010, he was an artist in residence at the Otis College of Art and Design and received a Distinguished Artist Award for Lifetime Achievement from the College Art Association. Michael Kimmelman wrote in the New York Times that his work may be the most impressive and visionary public art project in the country. After getting Project Row Houses off the ground, Rick went to LA and incubated a similar project. Most recently, he helped initiate Transformer projects, an attempt to aid New Orleans' comeback from Hurricane Katrina. Rick continues to live in Houston and has directly impacted the lives of hundreds of residents of his community and influenced countless other artists, writers, social service providers, and the occasional actor and community organizer in New Orleans. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in congratulating the 2010 Lenore Annenberg Prize for Art and Social Change, given to the one and the only Mr. Rick Lowe. Rick Lowe.